Welcome back to a brand new episode of IDTALK4ED Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Sarfo-Mensah. If this is your first time tuning in to the podcast, I welcome you and I hope that you return back for future episodes and new content. And if you are a returning listener or viewer of the podcast, I welcome you back and I hope that tonight's episode is one that you find enlightening, informative, and insightful. So before we get to today's guest, just a reminder for folks who are watching on YouTube to hit that red subscribe button so you can get notifications on future episodes of the IDTALK4ED Live podcast and other visual content. Also, we are always welcoming any financial donations to help us keep this platform going. No matter how big or small, your donations do help in order to continue to build this platform and to get it to that next level. So if you are able, you can send your donations to either Cash App at $ IDTALK4ED or Venmo at KwameSM, KWAMESM, for those who are listening on audio. Thank you kindly. So people, as you all know, I am a hip hop head, love hip hop, grew up on hip hop, and, being from Connecticut, we never got love when it came to, the hip hop culture. So we always gravitated towards other parts of the country, obviously New York, next door. We listened to hip hop down south, hip hop in the Midwest, hip hop on the West Coast. So, this is late 80s, early to mid 90s. So that was the era that my brother and I was in, and we got exposed to a lot of different artists. But today's guest is a brother who is he's just phenomenal. I actually had a chance to listen to his album, which is called the Joe Clark Mixtape. So for those who don't know about the late, great Joe Clark, he was a principal at Eastside High in Newark, New Jersey. So shout out to Brick City. And his character is actually the main character in the movie Lean on Me. So Morgan Freeman actually played Joe Clark in the movie. So for those that haven't watched Lean on Me, you got to check it out. It's a classic. So we're going to get into that. And we're going to talk about how hip hop pedagogy has evolved in our educational platform. So, without further ado, I want to bring on the good brother, Mr. Vernon Thompson Jr., to talk with us about the Joe Clark tape, but also the work that he's doing as an educator and an activist out where he is. So let's bring him on. Peace, brother.
Peace, Quan, man. I'm real excited to be here. I've been following your work, for a while. So I thank you first for the support prior to me having the opportunity to come on Identity Talk. But I'm inspired by your work, and I appreciate what you're doing for the culture.
Man, likewise, man, you're doing some powerful work, and I'm glad that, we're able to connect in this space and really do some deep dives into what you're doing. So, man, let's get right in. So, of course, I can't do this show without doing my research. So I try to do my best and research my guests. So I know that both your parents, your late mother and then your father, grew up down North Carolina. So,
Yes.
From the South.
Yes.
So I was wondering, have you always been in Connecticut, or did you spend some time in the South before moving to Connecticut? So what was your story?
Yeah. So my father was a pastor / activist. He really believed in utilizing his pulpit to empower the Black community. So he came to Bridgeport in '86 at East End Baptist Church in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And as many people know, and people that know Bridgeport, the East End is one of the roughest sections of the city. At the time, Bridgeport had one of the worst housing projects almost on the East Coast in Father Panic Village. So my father came to Bridgeport at that time, and he was able to utilize his position as a pastor to really impact that side of town. He organized alongside Jesse Jackson. They had Stevie Wonder come because at the time on the East End, all the trash was dumped in the black neighborhood. And there was
Wow.
just a pile of trash in the middle of the East End, and you could smell it through the whole community. It was over 20 feet high of just trash. The trash from the city was actually dumped on the East End, where primarily our African American and Latino community lived. So my father did a lot of work in regards to that in terms of working to support the city. So that was really the start for me of understanding the importance of speaking and working on behalf of our people.
Yes, sir. So let's stay on that for a second. Well, before I even ask the next question, thank you for mentioning that about Bridgeport because when I was going to college in Philadelphia at Temple, and I would tell cats like, yeah, I grew up in Connecticut. They think Connecticut is like Greenwich, right? Like all Connecticut is like Greenwich, very affluent, rich, wealthy. And it's like, no, we got hoods in Connecticut too. Y'all ever been to Waterbury? Y'all been to Hartford, the Beat? You know, even New Haven. There's some parts there that you
Yeah,
gotta watch out for.
as you say that, the scary part of Connecticut that a lot of people don't experience is you could be in the worst project in Bridgeport and drive 10 minutes in the Easton and
Mm-hmm.
there's a multi-million dollar mansion.
Yep.
And that's the way it is, when you talk Hartford and you drive outside of Hartford. The wealth gap and the proximity of our poor neighborhoods and then high level affluent neighborhoods, um, they're really close. And a lot of people, they don't experience or see anything like that. So it's just an incredible feat to just see and to experience. And we have children that I'm with in high school who have no idea. And then you take a ride into Greenwich in the east and these surrounding neighborhoods, and you see drastic wealth. And just to put it in perspective, Bridgeport is in Fairfield County, which is one of the wealthiest counties next to Beverly Hills.
Right.
And visiting Los Angeles and seeing Beverly Hills just kind of helped me put that into even more perspective as to what we're surrounded by in Connecticut. Um, in our towns that have um, the former housing projects, but the low income, the violence, the poverty, and those challenges, and you're right around the corner from wealth. And it is a struggle uh, for African Americans like um, myself and you to even find a spot of diversity for our own children to be educated when we're in Connecticut. There's very little diversity, and it goes from one extreme to the next in less than 5 mile proximities.
Yeah,
You
you're
know,
right. For sure. You're right about that. So you brought up your father, and we'll talk about your mother in a little bit too, because I mean she's phenomenal in her own right, and she just
yes,
needs we just need time to highlight that. But talk to
yes,
us about your path to becoming an educator. What brought you into this field?
yeah.
Give me
The
your
ironic
upbringing.
thing, hip hop was, that was what I wanted to do. I got my degree in marketing, and the intent and the plan was to get out of, and I was a basketball player. I was Division I athlete at Quinnipiac University. And as a Division I athlete, you don't get the opportunity to do the internships that everyone else has the opportunity to do. So I got out of college and I was trying to get right into the industry. I was working in music locally on 937 and in the streets in the mixtape era. But my goal was to try to get into the industry. So I had an internship at Zamba Records, which at the time was the publishing company for R. Kelly in Manhattan. And it was just a competitive industry. I got the internship. Next thing I know, I get a phone call that it's off the table. So, just in scrambling, I got a job as a teacher's assistant at Bridgeport Learning Center, which is the district's therapeutic day program for students with emotional disturbance and psychiatric challenges. So I took that job as a teacher's assistant and I was just inspired. And I felt that based on the education that I received, I felt like I can give the kids more. And from there, I really just kept um, attacking the education field. I was still doing hip hop, but I went back to school and worked on getting certified in special education. And from there, I got myself into the classroom. I was a teacher's assistant for 2 years. I went back to school, got enough credits to be a long term sub. Then I went on to get certified, get a master's in special education, and I just kept moving from there. But, I felt that our students needed to be challenged. They also needed someone who looked like them, who understood where they were from, who understood the challenges of where they were from in the classroom. So from there, I continue pushing education as a priority.
For sure. And I know that there were many people, especially your late mother, who had a huge influence on you as an educator. And I
Yes.
want to actually read the opening bars for The Spirit of Joe Clark. Like you open the album with these bars. So I'm going to just read them. And it says, every child is born willing plus eager to learn. A mother is a child's first teacher. That's why it's vital that our women are awakened. You educate a woman, then you educate a nation.
Yep.
And like right there, like when I did my research and read up on the late Reverend Dr. Blondie Thompson, I said, wow, like first black woman to graduate from Wake Forest School of Medicine with a PhD
Yeah.
in immunology.
Yeah.
And then she's been a professor in many other universities. So she was always in academia, for a number of years. So you gotta talk to me about your late mom, man, and God rest her soul. Like, how much of an influence did she have on your own development as an educator?
Well, my mom, as you know, being the wife of a pastor, our time was predominantly with her, especially in the younger years and with the high level work, that not only she was doing, but that my dad was doing. But even with her holding high level positions in universities, she made it a priority to make sure that we were educated, to make sure that she put the time in, to make sure that we were pushed on an academic level frequently. She made sure that she placed the emphasis on sitting down with us, making sure that we read, making sure that we completed our homework, making sure that we participated in extracurricular activities. And there was no other person there in terms of helping. It was her and my father, but at those times, she really put the time in and the efforts to cultivate us into who we were to become. And she took really no excuses. She pushed us hard. I remember my middle brother, you know, um, she bought him the phonics cards. She put hours in with him to make sure that he was as fluent as he needed to be. My youngest brother, she pushed him to be a musician. She made him stay on the piano. So she was relentless in pushing us and making sure that we gave our best efforts. And she made education a priority for us. Um, and her commitment to us commitment to our success allowed my father to accomplish some great things. You know, he was able to step in as we got older and really inflict what even more of what it need. He was a very strong he's a very strong disciplinarian. But as we got older, he then cultivated our minds on what we needed to do to be leaders. And the greatest lesson that he taught us was the importance of integrity. If we
Mhm.
wanted to have any significant position as African American men in our communities, if we wanted any influence, it was important that we maintain integrity and made the right decisions. That's one of the most important conversations that he had with us.
Wow. So when you had dreams of becoming a recording artist, in your younger days, I'm just thinking about the fact that your mom is in academia, your father is a preacher, and you already know what some of the negative connotations are around hip hop, particularly rap music, right? I'm wondering, when you told them, hey, like, I actually want to be a recording artist, like, how receptive were they to that idea? I
Well,
mean, were they dismissive, or like, what was their reaction?
now see, my dad, my parents had a high level, of understanding, um, and we weren't just putting out music. Shout out to my partner at the time. I had my partner Grav, and we were the group Catch 22, and we started Silent Movement with another friend of mine, Jermaine Giss. Um, but our mindset it was really about business. We started a DVD. We really shifted the culture of the city. So the support was really positive, in terms of, and I hadn't even evolved to where, I was in terms of the message that I'm at now. But I had to support. Also, I understood though I couldn't abandon education, and I couldn't abandon, my responsibilities to continue growing as a man. So I think that foundation, really helped me. Because sometimes, in chasing, in the thing about music, and trying to be an artist is not the kind of game where you can abandon employment because you're putting your money into everything that you're doing. Um, so I think, I had the opportunity to mature, because the thing, and I tell a lot of artists now, and if artists are watching, the most important lesson that you can have is tapping into your originality, tapping into the message that you want to portray, and not the message of the industry. And just to be honest, you've been around and you've seen the evolution of Connecticut hip hop. The station, and it's not to criticize them, but it's in all honesty, um, they were looking for what fit their programming. And when the biggest lane that's available, this is pre-internet, is what the radio is programming, artists are gonna feel like, look, I have to create what fits the program. And I began to evolve later in that pursuit that, look, forget what fits the program. When people meet me, when you meet people in the game, they aren't really looking for what fits the program. They're trying to find what is original, what your level of creativity is, what is your message, what makes you unique. And that was a major and important lesson in life. And I think one lesson that people can take as you look at Griselda now and you look at the wave that they have, it's all based on them just being true to who they are. Now that's become the thing to do. But they were true to who they were sonically and even how they wanted to portray their message. They said, we're not going to do any of those hooks. We just going to rap. So there's just valuable lessons that I gained from my experience of trying to get into this hip hop game.
Right. And I think that's what made hip hop so beautiful, especially, in the 80s, because it was all about originality. You could be a Big Daddy Kane. You could be a
Yep.
KRS-One and be secure about your intelligence. You could be Public Enemy and have the social commentary. You can be NWA and say F the police. You could be Tribe Called Quest. You could be De La Soul and just take it at a different angle and not present yourself as quote unquote gangster. So there were so many different, angles that you could take at that time. And that's what
Yep.
made the culture so beautiful. And, when I listen to the Joe Clark tape, it just has a throwback feel to it. And as somebody who appreciates that, and there's no knock on today's contemporary artists, because I do believe that hip hop as a culture, it does have to evolve. It is going to change. So you have to embrace the new with the old. So I do believe that. But I can't even front. I just still connect more with the more old school throwback um brand of hip hop music, man. So, you know, let's talk about that though. Like Joe Clark tape. Now, Lean on Me's a classic. Joe Clark is legendary as an educational leader.
Well, now I know you as an educator. Um, you understand this part about Joe Clark.
Yeah.
I tapped into his book. A friend of mine, Eldorado Anderson, who's also an author,
Hmm.
um, he had me tap into the book, Lay Down the Law.
Okay.
And in Lay Down the Law, it gives you a greater appreciation for Joe Clark, the educator. We know as educators that the movie only gives you a glimpse who he was.
Right.
But we're talking about one of the most brilliant African American male educators that has stepped into the field. Um, he was a high level teacher. You hear his vocabulary. He used words that reporters didn't even know the definition to. So this was not just a man who ran recklessly through a building. This was a brilliant African American educator, as brilliant as they come.
Yeah.
Um, so there was so much science behind everything that he did. It wasn't just running around, but it was an actual understanding of all the dynamics that impact urban education. And the fact that you have to address all of those to provide a high level of education. So I felt like when you talk about Joe Clark, when you read into the book, he touches every dynamic that impacts what we try to do in the classroom. So I felt like the Joe Clark tape, speaking on all of the experiences that I've had as an educator, I was blessed with the opportunity to work in two of our most challenging cities. I started my administrative career in Hartford, at Hartford Public High School, and
Wow.
it doesn't get any realer than that.
No, it
And
doesn't.
you get to deal with every type of scenario, and you get to experience every type of scenario. And then my career, high school career, began at Bassick High School in Bridgeport, another challenging school. And now I'm at Harding, which has grown from being a East Side high style school to where we are now, where there's been a renaissance and an evolution. So when you talk about Joe Clark, there's so much more depth to it, and you know because you have the experience that you can't just come in here and poke your chest out with these kids. It doesn't work that way. So I
Nope.
felt like there was more depth in him than the movie, and that's really what inspired the project. My experiences along with having a book like his to inspire me. I read his book knowing that I was going into Hartford Public High School and I was working at a Bassick High School, because you're dealing with you know young men who actually carry the weapons, who you work in urban education, and you end up, and a lot of our colleagues who come from suburban communities. There's nothing in school that can prepare you for a student who committed a murder or a
Nope.
student who got murdered. There's no class for that. There's no class for having a female student who ends up being sex trafficked. There's no class for that. These are the scenarios that we have to address to get the rigor and to get to relevance in terms of the curriculum. So I felt like he addressed a lot of the social situations that create challenges for us as urban educators. And you know, he had one of the best blueprints. You know, he had one of the best blueprints.
Right.
Urban educators are faced with the challenge of you have large groups of kids who don't come here to be educated. When do we draw the line?
Mhm.
These are difficult conversations that urban districts don't want to have. But you have to draw the line in terms of what type of place this school is going to be. Is it a hangout? And if you want to hang out, do you still have a right to come here and hang out? The percentages are always lopsided. 85 to 90% of our urban students come to do what they need to do. The big question is, how do we address the 10%? And
Right.
they're difficult questions. And if you go back to Joe Clark's interviews, he says the system is broken. You know, we need to find some answers.
Yeah, man. It still is broken.
It still is broken.
It still is broken. But all those things that you mentioned, the sex trafficking, right? Um, Students getting caught up, in juvenile detention. Like all these things that you're mentioning are things that you touch on throughout the album. So I do want to shift gears to that because you really hit on those themes. And honestly, if you listen to each of the tracks, these are the very issues that take place in many urban schools, the ones that we
Yes.
teach in. Like we've experienced these things
Yes.
uh, firsthand. So I want you to talk to me about the creative process of that album. So was it a case where you read the book? Obviously, you watched the movie. Did you have to like read through the book again to kind of get
Now,
your
I really, as you know from your experience, music came to me before tying in a lot of the truths from Joe Clark of
right?
just things like the song "Revolving Door,"
Yes.
which is about the cycle of murder, actual situation in the high school I was working at, where you had a kid who was a solid kid around a lot, and they challenged him to respond with gun violence versus using his hands. And his first time shooting somebody resulted in a murder. But that murder triggered another response from the other side and a response from the other side. But then we look at how many we lose in the process because we lose the students, the young African American and Latino men who pulled the trigger. We lose them to the prison system, and the others are left in the cemetery. So the revolving door was just things, just different things that I had seen. And as I saw them, I was inspired, to speak in terms of how we experience it in our seat as African American male educators. And I know you know from your experience, there's conversations that students have with us that, we don't ask them to have. Um, you don't ask them to go that deep, but you just get a different kind of depth into what's happening. I had male students that used to be comfortable with me, and I had to understand how to protect that relationship where they
Hmm.
were telling me, as a teacher, like, we got these kind of weapons in case it goes this direction. Um, just very, very, very transparent conversations that I was able to have. I had a group of students. Most important, one of the most important scenarios in my education career, I was placed over adult education night school,
Okay.
and I had students return from court
Wow.
for a friend who got murdered. And the guys who did the murder got off, and they came back to class and told me, like, this is gonna get crazy now. This is where it's gonna go. So, you experience those things, you do what you can to intervene, and then you have to step back and do what you can to prevent it. But we experienced this from a very unique seat, and I know that you understand where I'm coming from. And I think that perspective needs to come out because we have our colleagues who come from the suburbs who don't really understand what they're stepping into. And I felt like for those colleagues, they need to hear these messages. Also, the youth value hearing these messages from our perspective before they happen. Um, so hopefully we can save a life. And then one of the most important groups for me were parents to have something in terms of this music that they can reflect on in terms of the messages and the situations, which, a lot of it is just what we experience as African male educators. And, I'm in administration, but I started as a teacher, a special education teacher. And a lot of it, the unique part of the album was I started it as a teacher and I finished it off as an administrator, you know. And as the teacher, I'd made some adjustments because as a teacher, there is a more radical approach that you have.
Yes.
And then, as an administrator, the tone changes a little bit. The Roof was one of the records that I wrote as an administrator. But as a teacher, the intro, those those pieces, I wrote that as a teacher leader. You know what I mean? Who I was over the school governance council, so I took teacher leadership very serious. So a large portion of this project was from the teacher's perspective first, and then I rounded it off as an administrator. But as a teacher, you know you're looking at this stuff and you're from the classroom trying to change the world. You know,
No, for sure.
and that's what inspired me to tap into the music, because you're looking at it like I'm teaching, I'm talking. What other way can I get this message across? you know
So it's amazing, how you talk about the revolving door, as it relates to the perpetual loss of Black life in the
yes.
hood, right? I feel like there's a revolving door in our education system when you think about the constant teacher turnover that takes place, right?
Yeah.
It seems like one year you have a teacher that's in this homeroom, then the next year students come across another teacher. So, how can those students forge those positive relationships with teachers if the continuity isn't there? And if the
Yeah.
continuity isn't there, that just feeds to this cycle of Black loss that
Yeah.
you eloquently articulated earlier. So I think it's all a cycle.
It is. It's definitely, definitely a cycle. I was blessed early in my education. I've always, and beliefs are different. I've always believed that I wanted to spend a significant amount of time at whatever school I was hired by. I wasn't really into this, what's the best situation next year and this year. And I think when your heart is in the education, as you know, even if it means more money, it's never an easy decision to make a move, because there has to be some emotional connection to the places that you're at and the students you choose to educate. So I feel like continuity is very important. We're just in a business where um, the continuity and the importance of that to the students is not always placed in the forefront. But that it starts with leadership, and leadership really um, giving teachers some leadership and ownership of areas that they're strong in, and allowing them to connect with students beyond the classroom. One of the things we do at Harding High School We have multiple teacher leaders who lead various areas of programming that allow them to forge relationships that extend beyond the classroom. We do a lot of enrichment um, to our law clubs. Um, it takes extended educational opportunities beyond the classroom. And in the urban setting, finances are always a challenge, really because of the high level of stress. I think
Right.
that's one thing that kind of disturbs the continuity. So I think as a leader, it is, especially in urban education, it is our responsibility to attack some of the challenges that make education difficult by identifying how we can support students from a social emotional learning standpoint. But I think one important thing that me and you talked about that causes a revolving door in urban education, especially at the secondary level,
Right.
is we as a community have not been honest about what we do with students who are not valuing that educational setting. And I think you have to establish a high level of respect um, because this is a school, and we have to expect our students to treat it like a school by demanding that they treat it like a school. And that was one of the great emphasis of Joe Clark that people take for granted. Some of the first things he did at taking over Eastside High was get rid of graffiti, um, get rid get rid of furniture that was not up to par, that did
Right.
not show what a school should look like. So I think we have to one demand that we create conducive environments, and when you don't have them, there's high level of turnover, especially when your urban teachers can go to next town over and earn 10 to 15,000 more dollars with less stress, and then they focus on just providing instruction. So I think it's huge in terms of teacher retention in urban school districts that we do be honest as a African American Latino community in terms of how do we service our students who do get tied up in the streets, because when you're tied up in the streets or you're involved in these things, you need a different type of social emotional experience, because you're running into people you have problems with. So
Yeah.
education is not on your mind. Where's a setting that meets those students who are tied up in these other outside things that they either you know, run the school crazy, or we meet them where they're at. And I
Right.
think in secondary education in our urban high schools, I think we really have to look at what do we do with our students who are in and out of juvenile, because the chances are they'll come here and really get lost. And then they don't have the reading comprehension and fluency that's necessary for high school. Where do we address that? You know, education in terms of pedagogy, there is a unique challenge for our African American males who started getting lost in fourth and fifth grade when they come to
Mm.
high school and don't have the skills. High school's assuming that you've mastered basic math, so you
Right.
can do geometry, algebra 1. It's assuming that you surpass that. So they come here. We're not here to address that. But then at the same time, there's also strengths that they need to tap into. What strengths do they have? You know, I had one student who never got engaged, but knew
Mm.
he wanted to do real estate.
Right.
But he couldn't grasp what the importance of this high school experience to that was. So I think we really have to do a better job as educators of identifying how we can support a specific population that's not our majority. But if you don't
Yeah.
address it, urban education will have major, major challenges. I was at Hartford Public High School, which was a great experience, a beautiful place. And I was at Bassick High School, similar challenge, where you have groups of students who are deep in these streets, they're showing up, and how do we address them, you know, other than, you know, the discipline? And at the same time, do we exert all our energy towards them and lose the 85 to 90% of the students that are in the building? I say we need to figure out, what do we do to help these students who are facing these extreme challenges?
Yeah, man, shoot, man, you're dropping bars, man. But with the SEL, the social emotional learning, I think a key component of being a social emotional learner or someone that's SEL centered as an educator in the urban educational context is that you have to have the ability to see the beauty beneath the surface.
Exactly.
Like,
Excellent point.
we get so caught up with the aesthetics and how people look, and then from there we build these negative perceptions about people, about schools, about the quality and everything. But we need to take the time to invest in people and why the trauma is there, right?
Yes.
Why are they truant? Why are they disengaged? And speaking on the disengagement piece, um, I think it lends itself to the argument about schooling versus education, right?
Yes.
You talked about the brother that wanted to learn about real estate, but yet he's not engaged in the other content areas in school. Well,
Yes.
is it a situation where the student is not academically capable of doing the work? No, they're just disengaged. But what happens? We end up having this disproportionality issue in special ed where you have a lot of students like this brother that you mentioned who is brilliant, has dreams, aspirations of doing real estate, but because he doesn't fit the program
Yes.
or a specific context, we're just going to put him in a special ed classroom. We're going to give him an IP and just call it a day and keep it pushing. So there are a lot of things that are going on here.
So just backtracking to that question, one of the things that I see, especially I can speak for Connecticut, in
Mm-hmm.
order, so when that program doesn't fit, you know, what I was talking about in the previous question, well, what's the next program? And I think that's where we need to step outside of, especially when we talk about the comprehensive high school. What program will work for those students? Because this program is just not working. And that's that's an elephant in the room that we're not attacking. And it needs to definitely be attacked, because these students need to be met, you know, where they are, and they need to be met with a program that will fit their needs and will fit their interests. And those opportunities need to be created. What ends up happening is, any alternative placement, for the most part, when you talk about Connecticut, you almost have to have an IEP for an alternative placement, which is
Wow.
unfair. You know what I mean? You can't say that this doesn't work for me. This is an area I want to pursue. Where are there programs that meet those needs? One example, when I was at Bassick High School, we had a full mechanic shop. And there were students who I was like, we just need to put everything that they got to do in the mechanic shop. If you put them in the mechanic shop, they won't leave the building. So we need, their mathematics needs to be tied to being a mechanic. Their literacy needs to be tied to being a mechanic, you know, and their science can be tied to being a mechanic. And therefore, they have a program that will totally meet, you know, their needs. So I think what you're saying, when they don't fit the program, what program are we creating to fit the mold? And it's not our, I mean, it's not the majority. I feel like it is a small percentage, but by not meeting the needs of that small percentage, we're losing them, or there's a harmful effect.
Yeah, and I think that's the main issue. And I just wonder, why do we exert so much energy talking about curricular frameworks like a Common Core and not enough time focusing on trades, focusing on actual professions? You know, you have magnet schools, different parts of the country. There are vocational schools out there
Yeah,
where you have students, secondary level students, learning how to become engineers. You have people get into cosmetology, right? Who want to start up their own hair salons one day. Like you have these schools that exist. I just don't know why they're not in abundance.
I wish I had the answer to that, because honestly, as an administrator, I we spend a lot of time looking for these situations and forging partnerships, to create these kind of opportunities. So I'm not sure why we haven't totally gone that direction a little bit more. I know the state of Connecticut does place an emphasis on high schools having pathways,
Hmm.
and students being able to choose the pathways. But a lot of times, high school students don't know what they want to do, and they kind of just end up at the high school that they land at. You know, the percentage of students who come to a high school for a pathway specifically is low. You know, I would say maybe you have 25 to 30% who come in because, look, you guys had this pathway. So um, it is a direction that high school is going. Um, but I think, like you said, I mean, we have to. I think there must be more effort towards going that direction. There has to be.
Yeah, that's a definite for sure. And we could this is another story for another day. I mean, there's so much you have to unpack there. But I'm still interested in that social emotional learning piece because I feel like that's so crucial. We can't get to the academics if we don't deal with the mental, the spiritual, right? And the physical. So on the album, you have a whole track called KDEO, Kill
Yeah,
Depression and Oppression. So when I listen to it, it's actually one of my favorite tracks.
yeah,
Like I hear internalized racism. I hear cancel culture, right? These are things that came to my mind as I'm
yeah.
listening to that track. So what I want to know from you is how do we kill depression and end oppression in order to center mental health as a tool to end cancel culture?
Yeah. Just to start, I want to shout out the artist,
Yes.
Damu Amari, because, and he's public about this. Kill Depression, End Oppression, KDEO. I'm on his board, and it's actually his organization.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and he's fought depression, and he's fighting depression. He fights depression currently. So it was as organic as you could get, in terms of the message. And the main thing, love is one of the first ways to really help those who are facing these challenges overcome it. You know, Challenges like this, it's always tough to pinpoint an answer, but loving students unconditionally, offering another chance, but most importantly, one part that we miss about loving students, it's about giving them a chance,
Hmm.
because one, that's all you can do.
Right.
Um, you can't make everybody take that chance. All don't take full advantage of a chance. All don't respect the fact that they've been given a chance. But our responsibility is to give that chance. Um, and love involves you being honest. And that's one of the biggest lessons that I've learned in this school year. Because as an African American man and male, educator in the community. I still live in the community. I'm faced with difficult decisions that in some way will hurt people if you don't give them the truth. And I think love is giving a chance to someone to do the right thing to change their life, but it's also giving them the truth when it goes a certain direction or when it's time to provide discipline. Um, in response to certain things. But I think most importantly, we one have to love children, love them to meet them at their challenges, and to provide as many opportunities as we can to overcome and support through the process. Um, and the main thing that students lack, my background was at the therapeutic day school. That's where I started. And
Oh,
there,
okay.
the emphasis is on teaching students the appropriate social skills to navigate situations in life. So a lot of it is a matter of do you teach skills? What skills do they need to handle their situation? How do you communicate? And a lot of the things that I find is in giving students a chance, you give them an opportunity to conversate and communicate on where they're at in situations, and you'll find their processing of scenarios is just totally different from ours. So it's not an easy answer, and as an educator, you can plan a lesson, you can perfectly plan it, you can have all the right strategies
Yep.
for engagement, and something can go left. So I can't sit here and say that I have the answer, but I do say loving, giving a chance, and most importantly, for all educators out there from leadership to teacher, when you have to step in, you have to make a difficult decision that parents are not going to like, people won't like, that's unpopular. It's important that you provide the truth. And I think people can respect and accept the truth about whatever the situation is. Parents need to hear the truth. um, we as educators will get the truth because parents won't hold that back. But it's important that we honestly communicate on what the challenge is. And people may disagree with you, but I always believe in their personal time, people will reflect on truth, you know? So it's a difficult question to answer, but that's where I stand at. A chance, love first, give them a chance, um, and when you have to discipline or you have to communicate, be brutally and bluntly honest as possible.
Yeah, and with love comes empathy. And I
With
think
love
that's what's
comes
missing.
empathy.
That's what's missing
Yeah.
in our work. And I just find it weird that we have to have a whole curriculum created to teach people how to be empathetic.
If you don't have it, no curriculum
Right.
gonna give it to you. And that was one of the purposes of the Joe Clark tape, is that with the hope that you tap into some of the in-depth challenges that you can understand and gain that empathy, because every young man that, let's say, picks up a gun doesn't want to, but if the next man has it, what do you have to do?
Right.
And that's just one scenario. It's not always a violent situation, but the challenges that students are facing every day, when you step into that classroom, you have to have that empathy, because those are the things that are getting in the way of the education. But if you don't have the understanding, if students don't feel like you care enough for them to communicate and trust you in their communication, you won't break those barriers that will lead to some of the other things that we're going over in PD, like rigor, relevance, and higher order thinking. You really have to look at the things that are getting in the way of that, and how
Right.
can you address it, and do you have the skills and ability to address it?
For sure. And man, one final question before we get to the lightning round. Man, there's so much more we could have talked about, but I want to focus on a young girl.
Yeah.
Like first off, shout out to the producer who with the Lauryn Hill sample, right?
Yeah,
Shout out
I
to the
actually
producer.
produced that.
You produced that?
Yeah, I
Wow.
produced that.
Get out of
Yeah.
here.
The funny
So,
thing, Kwam, I produced that probably over 10 years ago before anybody
what?
thought of sampling it. So I had done that a long time ago.
Wow. And did you have to was it a struggle to get clearance to
I
get
didn't
for that
get it
sample?
clear. If that day comes, the song did what it was supposed to do. But that's that. I didn't get it clear.
All right.
Um, but if it's one of those things, one of my producer friends from LA, he was saying like if they ask you to clear it, then it did what it was supposed to do. You know. But I felt it was a necessary one to release it. I was on the fence about releasing it, but yeah,
Yeah, and I think it's a powerful track.
yeah,
Actually, it's my favorite one. Personally, it's my favorite because of
I
just the
appreciate it.
production and just the fact that you're touching on all kinds of things, the adultification of black girls, the hypersexualization, the misogyny that's still existing
Yeah,
when it comes to our young black girls and how it impacts their mental health. Like you cover all that in that short piece.
yeah, I appreciate it, man. Um, as I work closely, with young females, and I really, really try to drop as many jewels as possible in those regards because this is a very difficult time. But
Yes.
as you know, um, if we don't educate them appropriately, they end up having the children that we educate next, and they have those children prematurely. Um, One of the things that my parents instilled in me is children only have the opportunities that their parents can put in front of them.
Right.
Outside of that, you leave the system. Um, you leave them the responsibility to provide opportunity. But I mean, I got to see it just in conversations that inspire a song like that. When you tell young females, look, this isn't the time to have a child, and they don't understand why it's not the time because they don't see the importance of having financial stability, of being able to provide a solid education. They see it from the lens of where they are and what they received. And sometimes it definitely takes a lot of work to stretch the thinking beyond that, because a lot of people don't look at raising a child as a responsibility to provide opportunity and to create the best scenario possible. Um, and that's an important conversation that I try to have, especially with our young females because these scenarios that they're in, it's almost a scenario that's created where father definitely won't be there. So there's a lot of things that our black community does not value the same as they did in the 70s and the 60s and the 50s. I still believe it's important to have a mother and father in the home and
Yeah.
to live a life and move so that you can create that scenario. It's very important. But when we have generations that say, "Well, I'll do this by myself. I'll do this with him over there," um, we just raise generation after generation that has no value for the family unit. So that's really an important significance to that record.
Yeah. And when you were talking about the idea of financial stability, the fact that this is something that they should be thinking about before they make a decision like this, a life altering decision. Well, I would go on to say, well, why would they even think about that when they're trying to search for a love that they didn't get from their father?
That's
Like,
that's
if
that's the point.
right, if I'm coming from a place where my father's not around, I'm not getting that love from daddy. I got to get it from somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. And
That's
that's
basic. Yeah.
that's a challenge that we consistently face. And even having a mother that went through it that's telling you this, it's still, these things still don't they don't register sometimes. But I mean, we have to keep. Chris M did. The quote that helps me every day from him is where he says, like, everybody won't be woke, but we have to make sleep uncomfortable. And
Mm.
that kind of inspires me day to day, because this can get exhausting sometimes, because you don't feel like, you're totally changing the minds. And it takes experience. I've got to see young boys change their lives. I've got to see it. So I understand, like, you have to keep plugging away even when it feels like there's not an impact. At some point you will see the fruits of that labor, but you can't let anyone uncomfortably sleep and uncomfortably make poor decisions without you being on them, and creating that discomfort, because they're hearing you, they're seeing you address them constantly. And that's kind of what motivates me every day to do what I'm doing.
And you gotta just keep on doing what you're doing because what you're doing is just powerful. And man, you changing lives every day just
And I
with your mere
appreciate it.
presence. Just with your mere presence, brother. Just changing lives. So yeah, just keep up with the good work. But we're gonna close this out with a quick lightning round.
Okay.
So, with the lightning round, got a few quick hitters so that the folks can get to know a little bit more about you outside the classroom and outside the school setting. So,
I'm
um,
ready.
all right. Favorite self-care activity these days?
Man, it's still listening to beats.
All right.
Listening to beats is still. I wish I could say it, but it's listening to beats.
Cool. All right. Last question. If you can invite three influential figures to dinner, dead or alive, who would they be?
All right, I gotta go with Malcolm X, just for his impact, for his vision, and for what he could have accomplished. I gotta go with Fred Hampton for where his mindset was at in his youth. And then my last currently, I gotta go with the great Nasir Jones. Those would be my three.
Oh, nice. Shout out to Nas. This is actually his first time at the table. So shout out to him. All right, Vernon, man. Man, I appreciate you for taking time
Listen,
to
I
talk to a
appreciate you,
brother.
and thank you for everything that you're doing for the culture. And thank you for being from Connecticut too, and representing on the level that you're representing. You've inspired me as an educator to really work my social media and my platforms. So you're someone and a brother that I continually salute. So thank you for all that you're doing, and thank you for your opportunity and your feedback on the project from the beginning.
Man, I appreciate you, man. But real quick, before you jet, um, let the viewers and listeners know how to follow you on social media and tell them to cop that Joe Clark tape, man. Tell them to cop it.
Yep. So the Joe Clark tape, Vernon Thompson, on all streaming platforms. Vernon, Vernon, Thompson, Thompson, Vernon Thompson. And then all my social media is Vernon S. Thompson. That's Twitter. Um, that's my Instagram. And then on Facebook and LinkedIn, it's Vernon Thompson. Connect with me if you're an educator. Follow me, I'll follow you back. Entertainment alike. But much love to the culture. Tap in. Peace to Quam. Peace to Identity Talk for all that you're doing for educators like myself, and really giving us a voice and really speaking our stories, man. So I appreciate you. I was following you before I did the Joe Clark tape. So the respect, It's really amazing just to be here with you, man. So I thank you, man.
I appreciate the words and the affirmation. So I know you got to handle some business, so I'm gonna let you get to it, and we're gonna connect soon, brother.
Salute, man.
I
Thank you for
salute to
everything,
you.
man. Peace.
All right, yo. Peace. All right, people. So we're about to end another episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live. And as always, I wish you all good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace out, everybody.